There's absolutely nothing better than finding that wonderful, amazing, and incredibly elusive 5-star read. I feel like as readers, most of our time is spent chasing the high of that last 5-star book that you read, the one that completely consumes your life and you're thinking about the characters at all time, and when you're not reading it, you want to be reading it, and when you finish it, you get this major book hangover that feels like it's going to be impossible to get out of. For some reason, we love that feeling. We're just continually chasing that high. So what exactly makes a 5-star read 5 stars? Objectively, is it the writing, the prose? Is it the character development? Is it the plot and the themes that are talked about in the book? Or more likely, is it just that you're reading the right book at the right time for you? I have a theory that it is the latter, but I want to test it in this early part of February and give myself 5 chances to find a 5-star read. Because I can and because it might be fun. They're all going to be fantasy books, but I'm going to do my best to predict why I think it has the potential to be a 5-star read. It's not just going to be random choices. I'm actually going to try to find out what I want to be reading at the time and kind of talk about each book as we go along, just to see if it's possible to know if something's going to be a 5-star read before you read it. The first book that we're going to start with, no surprise, is House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas, because I just finished House of Sky and Breath at the end of January and then raced to the bookstore to get this book and pick up where the last one left off. So I'm already about 200 pages into this one. And the reason why I think it could be on the list of a 5-star read, aside from the fact that most Sarah J. Maas books I've rated a 5-star just because of personal preference, I think that because this one is kind of the end cap or the conclusion to a trilogy, the Crescent City series, usually the final books are the most explosive and they have the most satisfying ending. So typically, if there's going to be any book in a series that's 5 stars, a lot of the times it is the last one for me. So that's a reason. I love the characters, I love the story so far, and the last book, again, like many people have talked about, it left off on such a crazy cliffhanger that this one, I think, is just going to be insane all the way through. Like I said, I'm already about 200 pages in, and it has been nonstop. It has been such an extreme and exciting ride so far, and we're just gonna take that high all the way to the finish line, baby. See if we can get a 5-star out of it. So let's continue. There's so much that needs to be said about this book that I feel like I can't say because the entire thing is one massive spoiler. So I'm going to do my best to talk about it in the vaguest sense possible to protect everybody from spoilers while still giving my opinion to the best of my abilities. Where to begin? I just don't even know. This book started off so fast. It really is a direct continuation of the book before it. It picks up immediately after. That one ended on such an explosive high. This one starts on such an explosive high, and it really just carries it through for about 300 pages. The full first third of this is non-stop and a little bit exhausting. And then you get to a point about 350 pages in, not quite at the halfway mark, but you get to a point where it suddenly just stops for a second and it feels like there's a bit of a conclusion to the story and everything calms down and you get to take a breather for a second. And then that just continues for a long time. In the middle, it was actually a little bit boring at times and slow, which felt so weird coming off of this massive high in the beginning. It just was like going up and up and up and then cresting at the top, and then you're down and you're down here for so long, and then in the last like 100 to 50 pages of the book you're like way back up again. So it was a really big roller coaster. I felt like the pacing in this book was just not where it needed to be. In book 1 and book 2 of the Crescent City series, I realized that those books take place over a significant amount of time compared to this one. The first one is like 5 or 6 weeks. The second one is a couple weeks as well. And those are 700, 800 page books. This one is like 900 pages, over 900 pages. And this entire thing takes place in 1 week. And I didn't even realize that until literally the main character at one point is having an internal dialogue and she's like, oh, I can't believe this has all happened in 1 single week. I literally had to be like, is that true? Did this all just happen in 1 week? The pacing was really, really odd. It sometimes felt extremely fast. It sometimes felt extremely slow. I felt like the story itself wasn't crafted very well compared to the other 2 books, specifically as it relates to the villains. In the first book, in Crescent City House of Earth and Blood, the villain in that book, Micah, I thought was such a well thought out villain. He was intimidating, he was scary, he was unpredictable, so I was on edge anytime he was on the page, anytime he was talked about. I had this fear of, oh, he's a bad guy, he's like a big bad guy. And then you learn in the second book that really he's not the big bad, he's just a pawn for them. And then this whole other concept of the actual villains, the actual bad guys, is released and developed. But the problem for me was that the actual villains, the Astaris, I don't actually know how to pronounce it. I think it's Astari is how I've been reading it in my brain. They weren't that scary to me. Partly because they're like never on the page. You're just talking about the things or you're reading about the things that they do. You're not really witnessing them actually do it. It's just being recounted through other characters. And that just didn't hit as hard for me as I wanted it to. So this epic battle, this culmination of good versus evil towards the end of the book didn't really feel very rewarding to me at all because there was barely any evil for me. It felt like the stakes were just not there. That was kind of hard for me. I just think that the expectations were so high for this book. They were so high. Everybody's been waiting for this book for so long, me included, and it just didn't reach my expectation. And maybe that's my own fault. I wasn't very excited towards the end of the book. So I think that I landed on a 3.5 for this one. I still need to kind of wrap my head around some things, and I haven't read any other reviews from anybody else at this point, so I'm not even sure how the general public is accepting it, but I think we're at a 3.5, which is not super exciting, but life goes on. So we're going to try again with the next book, Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I have heard so many wonderful things about this book, so many people rating it 5 stars, saying that they were just completely captivated by it the entire way through. I don't know a lot about the story. I know that it takes place during a war and the main characters are rivals, I'm assuming. And they are war journalists, correspondents that kind of fall in love over writing letters to each other. And I love those types of books and that type of writing style. One of my favorite books is The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. The entire thing is just letters. And I think it's really impressive when somebody can tell a story and hook a reader so well only through characters writing letters to each other. So I'm intrigued to see if this one will hold up to that standard, but we'll see. Let's see if this will be a 5 star. I think that it could be a 5 star just because, like I said, I love the letter writing aspect of it, and so many people have rated it so highly that it's gotta be good. So we'll see. Okay, Divine Rivals. This was really, really good. Surprisingly, did not expect this, but I read this in like 6 hours. I sat down and basically finished it in an afternoon, which was surprisingly refreshing after coming off of House of Flame and Shadow, which was just so incredibly dense and meaty with details and everything going on. This one felt a lot simpler and a lot more consumable, but not in a way that was toned down at all. It really still felt like it had a lot of depth to the story and the characters. So it focuses on Iris and Roman, and they work at a newspaper together, and they are rivaling for a columnist position, a promotion in their jobs. All of this is happening while there is this war going on. It is a fantasy book. It's an urban fantasy book, which House of Flame and Shadow is also urban fantasy, so we're continuing this, but basically there's a war going on between these ancient gods in this world, and Iris and Roman are talking about it, and they end up going to the front together, and the whole time they're communicating through these letters, and they start off as enemies, not really friends, more like professional rivals, and then through their correspondence they start to fall in love, and I loved it. It was so delightful, and maybe it just felt good because, like I said, it was good to read something really fast after House of Flame and Shadow. This story is You've Got Mail. I don't know if anybody has said that yet, but it is You've Got Mail. Iris is Meg Ryan, Roman is Tom Hanks. He is the rich person that is gonna take down the girl because he doesn't care about, she's poor and whatever, and then they start talking to each other through letters or emails, and they don't know that they're talking to each other, but then he finds out that he's talking to her, and then they slowly fall in love, and then she has to come to grips that this guy that she's been talking to over the written word is suddenly the person that she doesn't actually like. But it's You've Got Mail in the best way possible. I really, really liked it. I think if I had to criticize anything about it, one is that potentially they fell in love just a little bit too quickly. It wasn't as gradual as it could have been, and kind of all of the sudden we weren't mad at each other anymore. All of a sudden we were like getting married, and that was nice, and it really was a sweet love story, but it was just a tad too fast. I think there's a little bit of not a ton of believability with that, which is not always necessary in these types of books, but I think I was missing a little bit of that. Also, there was basically no development when it came to what this war really is about, and the stakes of the war and the gods. You don't really learn anything about it, and I don't think that it was needed for this book. It's not like I was missing that necessarily, but I think that in the next book she's gonna have to really finally develop some of these concepts that she has introduced in order for it to feel like a complete story. So overall, I think it was a simple book, but it was so enjoyable. Rebecca Ross has beautiful writing style and prose. Her sentence structure, it's super romantic. It's very poetic, but not in a way that feels pretentious at all. It's just so good, and I really appreciate that. It was a joy to read, for sure. I'm gonna give this one a 4.5. I can't quite give it a 5-star read, just because of some of the issues that I have with it, but they're so little and minuscule, and I really, really liked it overall. It ended on a pretty big cliffhanger. She set it up to be extremely dramatic. I think there's a lot of work that she needs to do in it to kind of land in a good spot, but I'm really excited, and unfortunately my expectations are really high again, so hopefully that does not come back to bite me. Which then leads us to the next pick of this 5-star series is going to be obviously Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. So things that I need to see in this: I need to see more development with the villains, the bad guys, the gods that this war is happening with. I need to see more development with the love story between Iris and Roman, because you just kind of barely get the tail end of it in this one, and now they have some solid ground and some conflicts that they need to work through, so I need to see that. And I just want to see a good ending. This is a duology, so this should wrap it all up, and I don't want to have questions at the end of it. I think that's where I'm at. I just want it to feel good and solid towards the end. So I think it could be a 5-star because Divine Rivals was so close. And if she lands everything right, then this will be such a good series, such a good duology. I'm really, really excited. So let's get started. What to say about this one? I didn't like this book. I was expecting a lot perhaps I set it up to fail in that way, but this book was so messy. That's the best way that I can describe it. It felt really messy. The plot was sloppy, and I just don't think the storytelling was there at all. Once again, Rebecca Ross writes amazing individual sentences. She can construct words that are so beautiful. Each individual line and even paragraphs, I'd get to the end of it and be like, wow, that was beautiful writing. That was amazing. But then you get to the end of a chapter and I'd ask myself, what really happened there? What is going on? It was a very confusing story. So she did try to explain a lot of what I wanted her to explain from the first book, which was the gods and the war and just kind of the history of the land. It mostly felt like in the first book, she wrote herself into a corner and then she tried every method possible to write herself out of it, but none of it was the right way to do it. I had so many questions in regards to plot holes and just little things little loose threads that were never sorted out. And it would be really, really silly the way that she would try and explain things away. Like, there's a moment where it's near the end of the book and the main character Iris is asking like, how do you kill a god? Nobody knows how to kill a god. And then she just kind of happens upon this magical sword. This character's like, well, that's how you kill a god. You use this sword. But that sword, it was never mentioned in any of the other chapters. It wasn't mentioned at all in the first book. It was just little things like that felt like she was just kind of really phoning it in with coincidences, and she didn't know actually where she was going to go with the story, but I think maybe the first one did so well that she was pressured to get this one out as soon as possible. This just came out at like the end of 2023. So it's a pretty new book, and I think that the in-between time between the books was pretty fast. So maybe that was part of it, was just the first one was such a huge success, kind of like the Fourth Wing Iron Flame phenomenon, where the second one just was really, really sloppy. Unfortunately though, unlike Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, this is the last book in the duology, so there's nothing to continue on after this. There's no way to right the ship after it. There's not a lot of story that I can actually talk about because there's so many spoilers, and because it's such a new book, I don't really want to talk about them yet in case other people want to be reading it. But overall, really disappointed with this one. I don't know if I'm being dramatic or not, or if it really just was not great. I haven't read a lot of what other people are feeling, but overall, just not there. So I'm rating this one a 2.5. Moving on to the next one. The next book that I've chosen is The Serpent and the Wings of Night, which was very much a random bookstore pickup. I don't really know anything about this except that I think it's kind of like a Hunger Games trials scenario between the main character and some other characters in the story. And so I'm kind of going into this one very neutral. I'm not really expecting a lot because I don't know anything about it, which could work in my favor. Coming off of Ruthless Vows, I need a win. So here's hoping. So excited to talk about this one. Okay, The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This was probably a perfect example of reading the exact right book at the exact right time to find a 5-star read. So I realized in the middle of this book that the last 4 books I've read have been an urban fantasy, and the last 4 books I've read have been third-person perspective. This one, on the other hand, is first-person perspective following one character, and it's not an urban fantasy, it's just high fantasy, medieval, swords, magic, all that type stuff. I didn't realize how much I was getting really fatigued on third person and urban fantasy, because I was. And as soon as I picked this up, it was extremely refreshing to get kind of a change of scenery because I'm only reading fantasy for this challenge. Sometimes that could do a bit of a disservice for certain books if I'm reading too many in a row, I think. So this was a great way to break it up. And within the first chapter, the first couple chapters, I was super hooked. This is my first vampire book. I didn't realize it was a vampire book when I picked it up, but it is. I really liked it. I don't think that this is kind of your classic vampire lore. There's a lot of just some creative liberties that the author took that I actually really appreciate. Her putting her own kind of spin on a topic or a theme that's just been used so much and been made famous by quite a lot of past books. So I appreciate that she kind of took some creative liberty. She put her own spin on it. Basically, we're following one character, Oriah, who is a human that was adopted by this vampire king, basically. He's not king of all the vampires, but he's king of like a sect of vampires. And she's adopted by him as a human. And humans in this world are bottom of the totem pole. They are food for the vampires. There's not a lot that's going for them. So it's interesting for kind of the big shark to adopt this human. And she grows up in this vampire world, in the vampire courts, and she basically never feels safe because she is not powerful at all, and she's always kind of viewed as weak and prey, and her adopted father doesn't want to turn her into a vampire because in this world, turnings 2 out of 3 times, or majority of the time, will end in death. So it's not very common for people to be turned into a vampire. So that's not really an option for the character to solve her problem of feeling weak and powerless and prey in a world of all these vampires. She enters these games, which is kind of where the Hunger Games comparison comes into play. She enters these games where if she wins them, it's kind of like a fight to the death sort of thing. If she wins them, the goddess of all vampires will grant her a gift or a wish, essentially. And so she's going into it being like, I'm going to wish to be as powerful as a vampire, or get on the same level so that I don't have to be looking over my shoulder all the time. I don't have to feel scared or fearful of these creatures that I have been raised with. So that's kind of where the story really starts to pick up, and she meets a vampire in these games named Rain, who ends up being our love interest. This book was, the thing that I loved about it specifically was the pacing. And because you're first person perspective, I've read a lot of books where I'm not on the same level emotionally as the main character, where they are progressing really fast. Like they may fall in love with somebody, or they may make decisions about something else or different characters before me as the reader, before I'm able to make those decisions as well. And because you're first person, you're really like sharing emotions. And so if the pacing is off, and either I feel behind the main character or I feel ahead of the main character, maybe I've already made up my mind about certain things in the story and I'm just like annoyed at the main character for being so slow to get there. Those are things that I struggle with when it comes to first person perspective. But this book, I don't know what it was, but for whatever reason, I was on the same page as the main character. I was progressing emotionally with her the entire time. She was starting to soften up to the main love interest, Rain, at kind of the same time that I was softening up to him. She was making decisions about the vampire kingdoms and her adopted father and the games around the same time that I start making decisions about them. There's a lot of internal conflict that's going on with this main character, Oriah, that I was feeling at the exact same moment that she was. And that was amazing, that the pacing was so good and so well thought out that I was on the same page as the main character basically the entire time. So that felt really, really great. And it ends on a pretty hefty cliffhanger for sure. And I think that there's another book out. I don't know if it's a duology or if it's trilogy or whatever, but I'm so excited to read the next ones. It was super refreshing. It was really, really well done. I loved the characters. I really liked the story, and it was kind of a new genre or a new like subgenre of fantasy that I've never delved into before, so that was exciting. I rated this a 5-star. This is a 5-star for me. Anytime I wasn't reading it, I'd be at work or I'd be doing something where I couldn't be reading and I was thinking about it, and the whole time I'm just wanting to get back home so that I can finish this book. It was very front and center for me the entire time through, and even afterwards I'm still thinking about it. I really, really liked it. So this is a 5-star, but is it a 5-star because I was just so burnt out on urban fantasy and third-person perspective and this one just came at the exact right time? Or is it a 5-star because it's deserving objectively of it? I don't know. I also don't really care. I'm rating it a 5-star. I'm excited about it. So good. Highly recommend. So I have one book left in this little experiment then. One more chance to find a 5-star, although this is just kind of the cherry on top because I at least found one. But I'm gonna read Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This one, I'm a little, not hesitant, but I'm slightly wary of it because it has been really, really hyped up for me. Like, my expectations are pretty high going into it just because of who has recommended it, what they've said about it. I feel like it's all over YouTube right now. People are rating this 5 stars left and right currently, so I'm wary. I think it's a young adult. It's not a new adult or adult fantasy. I think that this is a young adult fantasy. So I'm excited to see if it can kind of be on the same level as some of the other books that I've read this month, just complexity-wise. I feel like young adult sometimes is just a little bit too dumbed down for my liking, and they just kind of gloss over some details that I think can be important to stories. But I don't know. I'm trying not to make judgments early on about it, but this one, people love it. So we'll see. It's also, ironically, kind of like a Hunger Games trial/games as the main plot point in this book. So again, that'll be really interesting comparing it to the last one. I really didn't think about it when I was plotting out these books for this video, the order. I just kind of randomly chose the order, but this one also taking place in trials or games coming after a 5-star read that takes place with some trials and games is going to be really interesting because I'm just going to be comparing it to this, and potentially that will not work well in its favor, but we'll see. I have an open mind and I'm excited to kind of learn what the hype is about. So here we go. Okay, the last book in my 5 chances to find a 5 stars, Powerless, is complete. There were things that I really liked and enjoyed about this book. There were also things that I didn't really like or appreciate, but after some research post-reading, I learned that this is Lauren Roberts' debut novel, which I actually think is really cool and kind of allows me to give a little bit more grace to the writing style because she's a young author. This is her very first book, and I think that there's a super high ceiling of potential. The writing style of this book compared to the other 4 that I read was a bit lower level. Some of the dialogue and the scenes and just the plot in general felt kind of cheesy to me and a little bit corny. There were some moments that were really cool and I really enjoyed, but overall, I think cringe is a strong word to use, but I was feeling just a bit of that cringe. So this book follows Peyton as our main character, and it takes place in a world where certain people have powers or gifts given to them after a plague struck the land, I think 60 years ago. It gave some people powers like elemental magic or healing or super strength, anything like that, and other people didn't get any magic at all, and those people are considered ordinaries, while the people that have magic are considered elites. And the king learned or kind of started a rumor or did something a little bit sketchy where he decreed that all of the ordinaries, people without magic, are diseased and they weaken the magic of the elites. So there was a decree that all of the ordinaries would be banished from the land or executed if they didn't cooperate. So if you are ordinary in this world, it's bad news, and you want to be somebody with powers. And powers are representative of your status in this world. So the stronger your power, the better you are in life. And the weaker you are, those people live in the slums, they're a lot poorer and don't have a lot more opportunity given to them. So Payton, our main character, is actually an ordinary that is living illegally and pretending to have powers. She's pretending to have this psychic ability so that she can stay in the kingdom, not be banished or be executed. There are, every 5 years, these trials, which is where the kind of Hunger Games comparison aspect of it comes in. Every 5 years, there's the purging trials that take place as a reminder of the plague that gave everybody powers. I'm not entirely sure. The origin of the trials was actually really confusing to me, and I had to look it up afterwards, after I was done reading it. I missed how often the trials took place, so I didn't know if they took place every single year or if they took place every 100 years, and so the whole timeline of the world that we're immersed in was super confusing to me because I just don't think that it was laid out very clearly in the beginning, so I didn't really understand the timeline of it. I didn't understand the motivation behind the trials besides celebrating this purging or this plague that gave people powers. It didn't feel super believable or compelling for just the reason behind the trials, and the trials are the entire book. Almost all of it takes place in these games, which is a lot. This book is a lot thicker than I imagined when I picked it up, and the text is pretty small. It's like 500 pages of dense text, so it did take me a bit to get through, and it took me a bit to get into as well. I would say it's an easy read, but it's not a short read, and most of it takes place in these trials that I didn't really understand and had to do some Googling to confirm it all. There's a love story between Payton and another contestant who is also a prince in this kingdom, and also his job is to track down all the ordinaries and kill them or banish them in the land. So you can see how that would be a problem with the two of them falling in love. It was overall a little disappointing because I think my expectations were pretty high based on what people had said about this book. So I initially gave it a 3, but after learning that this is her first novel, and after a few days of just sitting on it and thinking through some scenes, thinking through some things that happened, some dialogue, I like it a little bit more than I thought. So it's bumped it up to about a 3.5, which is so interesting. I've been thinking about this. These two books, The Serpent and the Wings of Night, which I gave 5 stars, and Powerless, they're not super similar, but they do have very, very similar themes and some plot points that are parallel. Both of the main characters are considered weak and powerless in the world that they live in. Both of them feel like they have to go through these trials or games in order to prove themselves to society and gain power and status. And obviously both of the books take place around these games the entire time, and there's a kind of enemies to lovers romance within it as well. I'm so curious, if I would have read Powerless first, would I have liked it more? Only because now I was comparing everything to The Serpent and the Wings of Night because I liked that book so much, and because I rated it so highly, it was so easy to compare Powerless to it, which I think is just another aspect of finding a 5-star read. I didn't plan the order that I was going to read these books in. It just kind of, I picked it up when I felt like picking it up. If I had read everything in a different order, would I have liked them as much? If I read A Serpent and the Wings of Night before I read Divine Rivals, would I have rated it so highly? Because after I read Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows, I was so burnt out and fatigued on urban fantasy. I was itching for kind of that classic fantasy storytelling, and so that made me like it even more. But if I had read things out of order, would I have rated it so highly? If I had read Powerless before Serpent and the Wings of Night, Would that be a higher rating, and would Serpent and the Wings of Night be a lower rating? I don't know. There's so many endless possibilities, which just kind of goes to show that it's really so hard to predict what a 5-star will be. I don't think you can attribute it to objectively what is the best book out there, just because that doesn't mean that you will necessarily enjoy it as much as other people have. I think timing is a big thing, and I think just a luck of the draw is how you find your 5-star reads. So not necessarily a helpful thing in future searching, but definitely an interesting experiment, and I've learned a lot while also really learning nothing. So to all of you looking for a 5-star read out there, I wish you the best of luck, and you should give The Serpent and the Wings of Night a try. So there we go. Can I have a high five?